We begin with that major development in the Middle East as U.S. President Donald Trump says he's spoken to the leaders of Israel and Lebanon. And according to Trump, these two leaders have agreed that in order to achieve peace between their countries, they will formally begin a 10-day ceasefire at 5 p.m. Eastern, which was just 2 minutes ago.
With Lebanon, it's very exciting. I think we're going to have a deal. We're going to have a meeting, first time in 44 years. And Lebanon will be meeting with Israel, and they're probably going to do it at the White House.
So the clock on that ceasefire started just moments ago and could be a breakthrough in U.S. negotiations with Iran. But in the meantime, the Pentagon says it's locked and loaded and ready to restart that war. The CBC's Katie Nicholson is watching all of this in Washington, and she joins us now. So, Katie, where do things stand with this new ceasefire, but also with the broader U.S.-Iran talks?
All right, so David, generally, this ceasefire, if it holds, it's a positive development. Just remember last week when there was just so much confusion around whether Lebanon was included in the original ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. And this was a demand that Iran had made that strikes inside of Lebanon had to end, even when they were at the negotiating table last weekend. So still a lot of questions really around whether Hezbollah is going to agree to abide by this. It has acknowledged in a public statement that this ceasefire exists, but not really whether they're going to play along. And in the hours before Trump even announced this ceasefire this afternoon, there were some very heavy strikes between Israel and Hezbollah, particularly in southern Lebanon. So a lot of caution inside of Lebanon right now. The parliamentary speaker, for example, he was cautioning people not to return to homes and villages until they really have a better sense about what's happening with this ceasefire. Right. And we also heard, if you go to the UN today, Israel's ambassador was also flagging concerns around what he described as sort of the complexity of dealing with the Lebanese government. He noted that Hezbollah, as he said it, does not take orders from the Lebanese government. They take orders, he said, from Iran. Of course, the U.S. president, he's promised the next 4 to 5 days. You heard him say the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the President of Lebanon, Joseph Aoun, will be coming to the White House for what he said were the first meaningful talks between Israel and Lebanon since 1983. Trump was also asked about that other ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran, which of course has less than a week left to go. And he said he would be open to extending it, but he didn't think it would be necessary. And he said, as he said many times over the last 7 weeks, that the two sides are very close to a deal, that Iran is agreeing to things that it hadn't 2 months ago. Just take a listen.
The big thing we have to do is we have to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, because if they do, you want to talk about problems, you'd have problems. So very important is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and they've agreed to that. Iran's agreed to that, and they've agreed to it very powerfully. They've agreed to give us back the nuclear dust that's way underground because of the attack we made with the B-2 bombers.
And of course, that when he says the nuclear dust, he's talking about the enriched uranium. Again, bear in mind, Trump has repeatedly said that the end of the conflict is near. This could be just him wish casting, but the administration still, of course, also getting hammered about the cost of gas because of this conflict. And they're very mindful of younger voters being turned off by this war, to the point that the vice president at a conservative event this week, he was heckled about it. And he had to acknowledge that younger voters don't love this conflict, which is a huge concern for them heading into those fall midterms where they're at risk of losing the House, possibly even the Senate. So there's this whole other thing hanging over them, this urgency to try to find some sort of way through broker peace between themselves and Iran and get that flow of gas and marine traffic again going through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, and throughout all of this, I mean, this administration has proven to be an unreliable narrator at times, so we have to sift through all of that to speak lightly. And when we have the U.S. Secretary of War, formerly known as the Secretary of Defense, gave an update from the Pentagon this morning. So what did Pete Hegseth have to say here?
We learned a little bit more about this blockade, which, of course, it kicked in on Monday after the talks really went nowhere over the weekend. So we got to see some maps, some schematics around the strategy. And the U.S. very resolute, saying they've been able to turn more than a dozen ships away, or around at least. And the Pentagon, though, renewed the threat of military strikes if talks fail, in addition to continuing this blockade. So the Pentagon chief, Pete Hegseth, today saying that If Iran doesn't choose wisely, the U.S. is armed and ready to resume strikes. Here's a little bit of Pete Hegseth.
You, Iran, can choose a prosperous future, a golden bridge, and we hope that you do for the people of Iran. In the meantime, and for as long as it takes, we will maintain this blockade, successful blockade. But if Iran chooses poorly, then they will have a blockade and bombs dropping on infrastructure, power, and energy.
Now, just on the complexity of this blockade, Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he also addressed just sort of how this has been working. Because remember how much marine traffic has basically been jammed in this area for such a long period of time, about seven weeks. And he talked about the congestion, and he sort of compared it. I think it was very evocative. He kind of said, like, it's like driving a sports car through a supermarket parking lot on a payday weekend. There's kids everywhere. That's what it's like trying to maneuver. They're trying to keep an eye on everybody that might fit the bill. Somebody who might be moving something from a port to Iran or back and forth, and also trying to keep an eye on their own ships and move around there. It just really speaks to how much traffic has built up. And he also spoke a little bit about what it is that the goals are of this blockade. It doesn't sound like they're backing down. Here's a little bit of Dan Kane. Oh, very well. But he basically just sort of explained. Okay. That's fine.
Sorry,
you know
Katie.
What? But I will say the other thing he said, which was really interesting, he made a point that it's not just about sort of this area where they are around sort of the eastern coast and outside of Hormuz. They're basically monitoring all Iranian flagged vessels in international waters and essentially pledging to, say there's one in the Pacific Rim, the U.S. will track down those vessels. So it really speaks to sort of how widespread this blockade is, this operation to make sure that nothing gets in or out, any kind of material support for Iran, at least through the waterways.
All right, Katie, thanks so much. This is CBC's Katie Nicholson in Washington. So as Katie was saying, U.S. President Donald Trump has invited the leaders of Israel and Lebanon to the White House for the first high-level talks since 1983. But while leaders are advancing talks, civilians continue to pay the toll of war. The Lebanese Health Ministry says more than 2,000 people have been killed in this conflict, and more than 1.2 million people have been displaced from their homes. That works out to about 20% of Lebanon's entire population. Israel and Hezbollah continue to exchange strikes overnight. Israel's strikes in Lebanon have been a sticking point, obviously, in U.S. negotiations with Iran. And today, President Trump says he believes a deal is close. Jon Allen is a former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and one of the people we call on in moments like this, and he joins us now. John, it's good to see you again, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Good to see you, David. Welcome back. It's great to see you.
Thank you, sir. We're almost 10 minutes into this ceasefire. As far as we know, it's still holding. How much faith do you have in this lasting the full 10 days as opposed to just these 10 minutes?
Well, I have faith in it because I think Donald Trump desperately wants to get back to negotiations with Iran. And I think this deal to the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is a key part of that. And that's why he's worked so hard with Marco Rubio and the talks in Washington with the ambassadors, and now essentially announcing this and then convincing both Bibi Netanyahu and President Aoun that they should agree to it and come to Washington. So I think he wants it to happen, and I think certainly the Lebanese want it to happen, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is being forced into it.
There are issues, though, when you look at it from the Lebanese side, John, that I wonder about, because, you know, obviously Hezbollah is situated in Lebanon, but it is an Iranian proxy. Israel has been bombing Lebanese bridges, occupying Lebanese territory, and not necessarily willing to surrender that, even if this has come to a resolution. So how does that complicate things, certainly from, I guess the Lebanese aren't fighting, but how does it complicate things on that side of the conversation?
Well, first of all, I think Hezbollah will agree to the ceasefire for as long as it lasts. Secondly, we have a government in Lebanon for the first time that has criminalized the military wing of Hezbollah. And there's a general consensus in Lebanon that they want this military activity by Hezbollah to stop. So that's a very positive thing. And the fact that the Lebanese cabinet wants to sit down with Israel for the first time, as you said, in decades, actually since 1948, there has been enmity between them. This is very, very important. How long it can last, whether Hezbollah will be a spoiler, I don't know. But for now, the people in northern Israel can now at least go to bed without being bombed, and the people in Lebanon can be in some quiet for 10 days. And hopefully, they can work something out that lasts longer.
But, we've seen statements from Hezbollah through its press office that any ceasefire must not allow Israel freedom of movement within Lebanon and the presence of Israeli troops should they stay there. It would grant them the right to resist under international law, right? So if Israel insists on staying in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah seems to be indicating that it will continue to fight until the Israelis pull back.
Well, my understanding is that Israel intends to stay within 10 kilometers of the border. They will not pull back fully from there. That will probably be a part of the conversations that will go on in the White House. And one has to be hopeful that Hezbollah will not breach the ceasefire for that.
Okay, that is a lot of hoping, though, right? And as you mentioned that this Lebanese government is at least willing to take steps in a meaningful way to deal with Hezbollah. It says it will take meaningful steps to prevent Hezbollah and all other rogue non-state armed groups. How do they do that? When Hezbollah was described, certainly before the degradation efforts by the Israeli military, as maybe the most powerful non-state military force on earth in some circles. So how does a country like Lebanon contain a force like Hezbollah and maybe splinter groups that come from that?
Well, this has been, one of the major stumbling blocks all along. You now have a government, as I said, that wants to do it, but frankly, it's incapable of doing it by itself because Hezbollah was, before Israel did some very serious damage against its leadership and against its militants, was the largest military, in the Middle East. And they had 50,000 rockets at the time. Now, a lot of that has been destroyed. Lebanon can't do it by itself. But if Israel begins to work with Lebanon, and if the Americans want to come into the picture, the French have said they want to come into the picture, if peacekeeping forces, serious peacekeeping, not just monitors the way they have now, but serious peacekeeping forces came into the region, you need a combined effort by the international community with Israel, allowing it to take place, and this government that wants to deal with Hezbollah. Not easy. They are a spoiler, just like Hamas is a spoiler in Gaza. But that's what has to happen. There has to be a coming together of forces to make sure that they don't continue, to bomb in Israel and then cause this retribution, this return fire that has been going on, for years now.
Look, there's all the military and security considerations to this. Then, of course, there are the political considerations. Trump has midterms later this year. Bibi Netanyahu, I believe his government goes to an election in October at some point. That's when he will face the electorate in Israel. Then you have the economic carnage that certainly the Iran side of this conflict is imposing in that region. I mean, we're all struck by the high gas prices here in North America, but we're buttressed from it compared to what Europe is dealing with. And certainly the Gulf states, where countries like Qatar are facing like minus 13% projections in their GDP. What do you make of Trump saying they're very close to a deal with Iran? Because a lot of the historic U.S. allies, they are bearing the brunt of this in Europe, here in Canada, throughout the Gulf region, and people would like a quick resolution to a war without clear strategic objectives, I would say, John, to be charitable.
Yes, it's I agree with Katie Nicholson. I think Trump has got a lot of hope and a lot of wishes. I think they've got a long way to go for a comprehensive deal, something like the JCPOA that was negotiated in the Obama administration. I think what they're trying to get to, the bottom line, is how much enriched uranium will Iran be left with, how much of it will be diluted, and for how long will they agree not to enrich. I think that's sort of the key, and if they can come to some compromise on that, then that will be enough for Donald. He does not want this war to continue for all the reasons you mentioned. The IEA just announced that airline fuel is, in about 6 weeks, could start to cause cancellation of planes.
Yeah.
They describe this as the worst energy crisis ever. So Trump does not want to be responsible. The problem between Trump and Netanyahu is Trump wants the war to end because he needs it for his politics, but Netanyahu wants it to continue for his politics. So it's Trump is going to have to keep the pressure on.
Yeah, I just one last quick point. He said in that clip that Katie Nicholson played in our conversation, Iran's agreed to give up on its nuclear ambitions. It's agreed. Like, I have a hard time believing that is in fact the case. What is your sense? Do you think Iran will truly agree to abandon its nuclear ambitions?
I think they will agree to reduce the amount of enriched uranium that they have. I think they will agree to, for a period, not to enrich anymore. The problem is that this deal could end up looking a lot like the JCPOA looked. And that would be, in one sense, pretty bad for Donald. But he's going to want a timeline and a reduction of uranium that looks better than the JCPOA, so he can claim victory.
Right, and whatever he does, he will claim victory. I think we've seen that playbook before. All right,
absolutely.
Jon Allen, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Always good to see you, sir. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks very much.